Hi, I am Professor Amitabh Banerjee. I am the author of COVID-19 Pandemic, A Third Eye. This book readings are a dissection of the events as they unfolded during the pandemic. And now, this book reading, I am trying to update the commentary on each chapter. So today we'll be discussing chapter 14. This chapter 14 was written about 2 years ago. That was on the Independence Day, 75th Independence Day. We are just 1 month, exactly 1 month from the 77th Independence Day. So it's better to prepare. The thoughts were on some Independence Day thoughts, and the title of the chapter is Panic and the Pandemic, Breaking Free Towards Freedom of the Mind. And Independence Day thoughts on science and art of spreading panic. I had reproduced a poem by Nobel laureate Rabindranath Tagore, in which the lines translated goes such like this: where the mind is without fear and the head is held high, where knowledge is free, where the world has not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls, where words come out from the depths of truth, where tireless striving stretches its arms towards perfection, where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way into the dreary sand of dead habit, where we have lost our way in the dreary sand of dead habit, where the mind is led forward by thee into ever widening thought and action, into that heaven of freedom, my father, let my country awake, Rabindranath Tagore. So I have just taken this poem and line by line, I have analyzed how during the COVID pandemic all these were ignored. We went just in the wrong direction. And this is important. Again, we are coming towards Independence Day. And again, there is a panic of the pandemic and future pandemic. So we should follow the Tagore's wisdom and keep our head held high, and the mind should be without fear. So let us see how during the pandemic all his teachings were ignored. As we celebrate the 75th Independence Day, that was 2 years back when I wrote it, the majority of our people are living in panic of the pandemic. In the current pandemic, the response of most world governments has added to the woes of the people. The world is facing a global iatrogenic disaster. The freedom and autonomy of people are also severely curtailed with every wave or the apprehension of a wave, ostensibly for saving the people from the novel coronavirus. Frequent lockdowns are destroying livelihoods, and in the long run, more people will die from poverty associated conditions than will be saved from COVID 19. In this environment, the mind is full of fear and it is difficult to hold the head high. What about knowledge? So, first line he says, hold the head high, but the way panic is created, everyone was with bowed head and with a mask. So, how can you hold your head high? What about knowledge? He had said that knowledge should be free. What about knowledge? Knowledge, particularly scientific knowledge, thrives when opposite points of views and alternative hypotheses are debated and discussed. Great disagreements generate great science. History of medicine has many examples of doctors who did not conform to groupthink and were ridiculed and dismissed as mavericks, only later to be proven right. Ignaz Semmelweis, the Hungarian physician in the 19th century, based on meticulously collected data, advocated hand washing to prevent infections, which was responsible for high mortality after birth. In his lifetime, he was ridiculed and ostracized by the medical community, who declared his inference, in spite of evidence, outlandish. Dejected, he took to alcohol and ended in an asylum in 1865, where he was beaten to death. He paid a heavy price for his courage of conviction. After more than a century and a half, the world is following his advice with gusto. Now we are washing hands as if there's no tomorrow. Professionals form powerful associations which promote the status quo at times under the garb of medical consensus. Dead habit of Tagore. As he said, no, let not the mind decay into the dead habit of. Going against groupthink is not easy and can endanger one's academic and scientific career. History is repeating itself. Any viewpoint against the present medical consensus is censored instead of being debated. Dogma is replacing debate. Science decays in such an environment. In the era of grants driven research, often the scientific script is influenced by the sponsors. Knowledge is not free. To acquire it through research, one needs research grants. How to realize Tagore's dream of knowledge being free when research is possible only by grants from sponsors with vested interest? Perhaps one way can be more investment by the state in research or corpus for research generated by unlinked anonymous donors from corporate business houses can also be considered where there is no conflict of interest. The pandemic has broken the world into fragments. Tagore had warned against that, where the world is not divided into fragments. The pandemic has done that, broken up the world into fragments. The response to it led to several travel restrictions. After the availability of vaccines, vaccine passports are being contemplated. Scientists questioning the safety and efficacy of vaccines are labeled as anti-vaxxers instead of rebutting them with evidence and hard data. This debate with evidence and hard data will also convince the people better and will remove vaccine hesitancy rather than propaganda and collar tunes. Alas, this clear stream of reason envisaged by Tagore has lost its way. Clear stream of reason has lost its way. What is the way forward to clear the stream of reason and steer it towards the proper course? Fear is generated by ignorance. Fueled by media and vested interests, the panic spreads like forest fire faster than any virus. Population panic makes people vulnerable to exploitation by vested interest. Vested interest like the mass hysteria is to vested interest like the mass hysteria to be as prolonged as possible. Regrettably, most countries, except for few notable examples like Sweden, treated people in a paternalistic manner rather than as free citizens. Like parents discipline their child to invoke fear to make them behave in a desirable manner, governments, media, and even academics spread panic and fear to coerce people to comply. The vaccine for mass panic is risk communication. This should be transparent and informed. Creating panic and fear with its offshoots of stigma and shaming and ridiculing is manipulation and not risk communication. While scientists are exploring precision medicine to develop fast-track vaccines, trace variants, and the behavior, a similar precision approach to risk communication is desirable to inform the people and eliminate panic. People should be made to realize that daily we live with some amount of risk to life. This risk can never be reduced to zero. So if we wait for zero cases of COVID, we would be in perpetual lockdown and most of us will die of starvation before the virus reaches us. Similarly, like all respiratory viruses, there will be seasonal fluctuations. These molehills can be converted into mountains by various forms of conflicts of interest. Risk estimation, which relies on science and judgment, need to be emphasized for public information. Science of statistics can compile deaths in past waves to predict future calamities. Judgment involves social and political issues. It involves points of view of individuals and communities who face the risk. A trade-off is always involved between perceived benefits and harms. This seems to have been overlooked by most world governments in this pandemic. The risk of dying after catching the coronavirus is 0.3% globally and lower in India because of younger population, or risk is even less, like almost 0.05% in India. Based on this hard data, it can be communicated to people that if a healthy person gets infected with novel virus, chances of survival for that person is 99.9%. This survival is far higher than most of our endemic diseases. Even this risk is not uniform across the age strata. Healthy children and young people have almost zero risk of dying from COVID-19. Risk communication should also stress on the high-risk groups such as people with comorbidities, the frail, elderly, and perhaps even younger people with comorbidities. Focused protection can be advised for them, while the healthy that face minimal risk can carry on their routine activities. The implications of the results of the latest sero survey by ICMR is almost 67 to 70% of the population have shown to have protective IgG antibodies. If properly communicated, can allay the population panic, but the government policy appeared to be entirely different. Let us hope that this Independence Day reason and rationality leads us back into ever-widening thought and action into that heaven of freedom envisaged by Tagore. It was a homage to Tagore and on the Independence Day 2 years ago, and we are again approaching the 77th Independence Day, and again there is the generation of panic, like bird flu panic or pandemic X panic or WHO TTB require and all this. So again, the world governments the trying to raise the panic button, and it is up to the citizens of democracies like India and who love democracy, who love freedom, who love Tagore, to rise to the occasion and ask questions. I am not saying to always deny. If there is a genuine risk, well and good, but let the world governments and the policymakers to convince with hard evidence the uh, authentic risk, not the propaganda and panic, which can only lead to another disaster of draconian measures and harsh measures, which was the main cause of the misery of people rather than any virus. Thank you. This is what I wanted to convey.